The rain had just begun to fall in a light mist that glazed the sidewalks and rooftops in silver. As Mira hurried across the city plaza, her worn shoes splashing in shallow puddles, and her coat drawn tightly around her slender frame after another exhausting double shift at the tiny brewhouse cafe, a place she never loved but had come to rely on for survival, she walked with her head down and her bag clutched under her arm. Passing by crowds of strangers with umbrellas and the occasional honk of impatient cars when something shiny near the edge of the curb caught her eye and made her paws bending slightly, she picked it up and found a worn leather keychain with initials pressed into the tag in elegant gold lettering the leather. Loop frayed at the edges, and attached to it was a tiny transparent pocket holding a faded photograph of a smiling woman and a little boy, whose eyes shined with joy. Though time had dimmed the color, the connection between them in the photo was unmistakable. She looked around to see if anyone nearby seemed to be searching for something precious, but there was only the hum of city noise and the occasional shiver of wind brushing her wet hair against her cheeks. Mira hesitated, then slipped the keychain into her coat pocket, telling herself she would try to return it. It didn't feel right to ignore it, not when someone somewhere had clearly treasured it. She didn't know why she cared so much, but something about the photo stuck with her, the kind of warmth and innocence that felt too rare in her own life. The next day, she returned to the same spot during her short break, carrying the keychain wrapped carefully in tissue. Unsure of where to begin, she walked until she saw a sleek, glass building with mirrored windows towering above the street with a nameplate near the door that read Cade Enterprises, and as she stood there staring at it, she saw the initials, a K on the keychain, and her gut told her this was no coincidence. Stepping inside nervously, she approached the front desk where a well-dressed receptionist looked up from her computer and gave her a polite, curious glance. Mira cleared her throat and said she found something she believed belonged to someone in the building and held out the keychain delicately, as if it might fall apart. The receptionist's eyes widened as she took at her, expression shifting from neutral to surprised in an instant. "Where did you find this?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "On the sidewalk just outside," Myra replied. "I didn't know if someone was looking for it, but it seemed personal." The receptionist nodded slowly and pressed a button on the intercom. "Mr. Cade, someone found your keychain. She's here." Myra's heart thudded hard in her chest. She hadn't expected anything more than a simple thank you, and certainly hadn't anticipated speaking to the owner in person. A few moments later, the private elevator opened with a chime, and a tall man in a dark suit stepped out, his presence immediate and composed, with sharp features and tired eyes that suggested he hadn't slept in days. The way he walked suggested purpose and precision, yet the moment his gaze landed on the keychain in the receptionist's hand, something softened in his face. He reached for it slowly, like it was sacred, and turned it over with a kind of reverence that Mira didn't understand until she saw his eyes focus on the tiny photograph. His hands tightened around it, and for a long moment he didn't speak. When he finally did, his voice was deep and low and full of something heavy. "You found this, yes?" Mira answered quietly, not wanting to intrude. "I saw it yesterday after work and it looked important." "It is," he said. "It's the only photo I have left of my wife and my son together. They passed away 3 years ago, a car accident." Myra felt the air leave her chest as if his pain had reached out and touched something hollow inside her, and she lowered her eyes, unsure of what to say. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to cause any pain." "You didn't," he said. "You did the opposite. Most people wouldn't have done what you did." "Thank you." Mira nodded awkwardly. "I didn't do anything special, really. I just didn't want it to be lost forever." He looked at her then, his gaze lingering, not in judgment, but in contemplation, as if he was trying to read something in her eyes, and perhaps he did, because his tone softened again. "I'm Adrian Cade," he said, extending his hand. She hesitated, but shook at Mira. "It's nice to meet you. Do you work nearby?" he asked. "Yeah? Just a few blocks at the brewhouse cafe." "It's not much, but it pays the bills, and you gave up your break to bring this back." He asked, something like wonder flickering in his expression. She shrugged. "It just felt like the right thing to do." He smiled faintly. "That's rare," he said. "Most people are too busy looking out for themselves." "Like to thank you properly. Would you have lunch with me?" Mira blinked, uncertain if she'd heard him right. "No, that's okay. I didn't do this to get anything, I promise. He shook his head. I'm not offering out of obligation. I just want to know more about someone who acts selflessly in a world that doesn't reward it. She studied his face, looking for any sign of pretense, but found none, and slowly nodded. All right, just lunch. She followed him into the elevator and up to the top floor, where sunlight poured through the glass walls of his corner. The space was clean, organized, and warm in a surprisingly human way. Not the sterile coldness she had imagined for a CEO's workspace. There were bookshelves, framed art, a few plants, and on his desk a second framed copy of the same photograph. From the keychain she stared at it quietly, and Adrian noticed. They look happy, she said. They were, he replied, his voice gentle. They were my whole world. She's gone now, and my son lives with my sister out of state. I'm still trying to figure out how to be enough for him. Myra didn't speak. She just nodded, understanding in a way words couldn't express, because even if their stories were different, their loneliness felt the same. Adrian gestured to a small dining area where his assistant had laid out lunch, and though it was unlike anything she usually ate, Myra forced herself to relax slowly over bites of grilled salmon and quinoa salad. She told him about her grandmother who raised her and passed away last winter, about juggling 2 jobs to pay rent, about how school was a dream she'd placed on pause because survival came first. Adrian listened not just to the words, but to the way her voice faltered when she mentioned her grandmother, and the way she folded her napkin between her fingers when she spoke of unfinished dreams. You're stronger than you realize, he said at one point, and Myra had to look away, because no one had ever said that to her before. They ate slowly, exchanging pieces of their lives across a table neither had expected to share, and when it was time to leave, Adrian walked her to the elevator himself and said, "If you ever need anything, you can call me. I'm not offering charity. I just believe that good people deserve to be seen." Myra smiled. "Thank you, but I'll be okay. I always am." He nodded, not pressing further, and the elevator doors closed with a soft ding as she descended back to her world. Myra left the building with a strange mix of feelings: warmth, confusion, curiosity, and something like hope brushing quietly against the edges of her guarded heart. 3 days passed since Myra had returned the keychain and returned to her normal rhythm of life, yet nothing about her felt quite the same. The memory of that quiet office, with its soft sunlight, and the weight of Adrian's gaze still lingered. In her mind, like a song she couldn't forget, she tried to brush it off, blaming her imagination, or perhaps her loneliness, but the truth was that no one had ever looked at her the way. He did, not with pity or expectation, but with a strange kind of curiosity that made her feel seen in a way she had never known before. So when the front door of the brewhouse cafe opened that rainy Thursday morning, and she looked up to see Adrian Cade stepping inside in his sharp gray coat and carefully tousled hair, her heart gave a small jolt. He stood at the entrance for a moment, scanning the cafe until his eyes found her, and when they did, he smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and made her feel suddenly shy. She quickly wiped her hands on her apron and stepped forward, unsure whether to feel flustered or curious or both. "You came," she said, trying to sound casual. "I did," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "I owed you a coffee at the very least." She laughed nervously and led him to a quiet table in the corner where she knew the light would be soft and the noise minimal. He sat down and ordered black coffee, no sugar, no cream, while she took his order with trembling fingers, wondering what her manager would say if he saw her chatting with a customer for too long. But to her surprise, Adrian didn't rush. He asked about her shift, how things had been since their last meeting, whether she had finally taken a break that week. She smiled more than she expected to in those few minutes, feeling strangely light, even though her world hadn't changed on the surface. Then, just as he was about to leave, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "This is for you," he said gently. She looked at it, hesitant to touch something that seemed too formal, too unexpected. "What is it?" she asked. "A recommendation letter," he said, "in case you ever want to go back to school. I meant what I said about deserving to be seen." Myra stared at the envelope as though it might disappear if she blinked too hard, and her throat tightened. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Adrian replied. "Just promise me you'll believe in yourself even a little." But she nodded slowly, clutching the envelope like it was something sacred. After he left, the rest of the day passed in a haze, and that night She sat on her old secondhand couch, rereading the letter over and over, a glowing recommendation from a man whose signature opened doors and whose words carried weight, and with every line she read, she started to feel like maybe, just maybe, her dreams didn't have to stay locked away. The next few weeks passed in a blur of shifts and deadlines and application forms. She dusted off her old academic records, spent nights poring over scholarship essays, and started to allow herself to imagine a future not just of survival but of growth. One evening, while walking home in the dim orange glow of the setting sun, she heard her phone buzz, and when she checked it, a message lit up the screen from an unknown number, but the name below it told her everything she needed to know. "It's Adrian. How's school prep coming along?" She stared at the message for a long moment before replying slowly. "It's overwhelming, but exciting," she wrote. "I haven't felt this alive in years." "Good," he responded. "You deserve it. You ever need anything, you call me." And she did. Over the next month, their messages became frequent, not daily, but often enough that his absence felt strange when he didn't check in. She started learning about him. To not just the CEO, but the man behind the title, how he played piano in the evenings when his mind needed stillness. How his son Liam was 8 years old and loved dinosaurs and robots and asked too many questions about stars. How Adrian still hadn't figured out how to explain death in a way that made sense to a child. Mira responded with stories of her own. The childhood spent on a small balcony under the stars with her grandmother who made wishes on comets. How she used to believe in fairy tales and how losing her only parent figure made her afraid to trust the world. Adrian listened not just with ears but with his whole heart, and slowly Myra felt her world expand from the narrow lanes of survival to the wide roads of possibility. One afternoon, after submitting her final college application, she walked out of the cafe with a spring in her step and ran straight into Adrian, standing on the sidewalk, holding 2 cups of coffee and a small bag of pastries. "I figured you could use a treat," he said, grinning like a teenager. Playing hooky, she laughed and took the cup, and they sat on a nearby bench where the city buzzed around them, but their conversation felt like a quiet bubble, untouched by noise or time. "You really didn't have to do this," she said. "I wanted to," he replied, then paused and looked at her more seriously. "Mira, you ever think about what you'd be doing if things had gone differently?" She thought for a moment, then nodded. "Sometimes I think I'd be a teacher or a writer or maybe someone who helps kids who've lost people like I did. I used to think those dreams died with my grandmother, but now I don't know. Maybe they just got buried." He touched her hand briefly, just a small gesture, but enough to send a ripple through her chest. "They're still there," he said. "I see them when I look at you." She didn't know what to say, so she just smiled, the kind of smile that came from a place deeper than politeness, the kind that said thank you without words. The days continued, and Mira soon received an email from a local university confirming her acceptance, along with a partial scholarship, and when she told Adrian, his response was immediate. "Let's celebrate." And before she could protest, he sent her a location and time and told her to dress however she felt comfortable. That evening, she arrived at a small rooftop restaurant overlooking the city, dressed in her one good dress, a simple navy blue one her grandmother once called timeless. Adrian greeted her not in his usual business suit but in a casual shirt and jacket, his hair a little messy from the wind and his smile brighter than she'd ever seen. He raised a toast to her, 2 second chances, and 2 people who don't expect anything in return but give everything anyway. She blushed and looked away, but deep down her heart was full. They talked and laughed, and by the end of dinner something between them shifted, not suddenly, but with the slow certainty of waves shaping the shore. When he walked her to the metro station, he said something that made her pause. "Mira, you've changed something in me. I don't know what this is yet, but I know. I don't want it to end." She looked up at him and nodded, not ready to name it either, but knowing she felt it too, the kind of connection that didn't need labels to feel real. That night she couldn't sleep, not because of worry or fear, but because for the first time in years, she was dreaming with her eyes wide open, and the keychain that had once been forgotten on a rainy street now rested on her dresser like a silent reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness can unlock a world you never saw coming. The sky was painted in soft gold and amber as the weeks unfolded into early spring, and Mira's life began shifting in ways she had once believed were reserved for other people, the lucky ones, the privileged ones, the ones born on the right side of chance. But now, each day held a thread of wonder woven through the mundane as she balanced her remaining shifts at the cafe with her upcoming college orientation. People around her began to notice the difference not just in how she carried herself but in her eyes, which once dimmed by exhaustion now sparkled with a cautious hope. Her colleagues whispered that she looked lighter, like someone finally breathing again, but no one knew. The reason was more than just college, it was Adrian. His presence in her life, like a steady flame guiding her gently out of the dark, though nothing had been said aloud, and no promises exchanged. Their connection deepened with every shared coffee text message and quiet conversation on park benches or short walks after work. There was no dramatic confession, no sudden rush into romance. It was something more grounded, more real, a slow unfolding of hearts that had been stitched shut by loss and loneliness for too long. And yet somewhere inside Mira, a voice warned her to stay cautious, not because Adrian had done anything wrong, but because life had rarely given without taking, and she wasn't sure how to trust something so gentle, something that didn't demand anything from her but simply showed up consistently like sunlight at dawn. One Friday evening after her last shift before college orientation, she found Adrian waiting outside the cafe again, this time with a small bouquet of wildflowers in hand and a nervous smile she had never seen on his face before. "Congratulations," he said softly. "I thought you deserved something beautiful for the new chapter." She accepted the flowers with both hands, her breath catching in her throat as she realized no one had ever brought her flowers before, not once, not in birthdays or heartbreaks or moments of quiet despair. Not even her past relationships, which had been few and fleeting and always ending before they truly began. "Thank you," she whispered, and before she could think or calculate her doubt, she leaned forward and hugged him, a gesture so sudden it surprised even her. But Adrian responded without hesitation, wrapping his arms around her with the kind of care that spoke louder than words. They stood like that for while in the fading light, holding each other in the in-between space of something just beginning, and when they parted, his eyes searched hers. Not for permission, but understanding, and in hers he found it. They walked to a quiet diner on the edge of town where the seats were worn and the jukebox still worked, and over milkshakes and fries he told her about Liam, his son, and how he was returning from his aunt's house the following weekend for good. Mira listened intently, watching the way Adrian's face softened whenever he mentioned Liam, and though she had never been around children much, she found herself smiling at the stories of dinosaur impressions, bedtime battles, and impossible questions about planets and dreams. "A lot like his mother," Adrian said, his voice quieter and steadier when he said it. "Curious, kind, sensitive. I've tried to give him everything, but I worry sometimes that I've been too focused on holding it all together. I don't want him to think I'm a stranger. When he comes back, he won't." Myra said firmly, "If he's anything like you, he'll know he's safe." Adrian's eyes met hers, and something unspoken passed between them, something fragile and sacred. The next week, Myra started classes and found herself immersed in a world she had longed to re-enter: classrooms with chalkboards and debates, study groups and shared laughter. And while she felt out of place at first, surrounded by younger students with bright sneakers and untouched optimism, she also felt something deeper, a sense of belonging earned through struggle and determination. Adrian checked in often, not with pressure but with support, and Liam returned on a sunny Sunday morning, his arms wrapped around Adrian's neck. The moment he stepped off the plane, Mira didn't meet him right away, not until Adrian invited her over for dinner the following Friday. Unsure of how Liam would respond or whether Mira would fit into their world, she wore a simple dress and brought a book about stars as a gift for Liam, remembering Adrian had said he loved them. And when the door opened and Liam peered up at her with curious eyes and a cautious smile, she bent to his level and said, "I heard you're the bravest astronaut on Earth. Is that true?" Liam grinned wide and nodded proudly. "I'm gonna go to Saturn someday, then maybe. I'll need your help," she replied. "This book's full of star maps and alien facts. Want to explore with me for a second?" He snatched the book from her hands and tugged her toward the couch, and just like that, something clicked. Dinner was filled with stories and laughter, and Adrian watching the two of them like he was witnessing something he never dared hope for. after Mira helped Liam brush his teeth and tucked him into bed with a whispered good night, Adrian stood in the doorway, watching her with such tenderness. It nearly undid her. He didn't say a word, just reached for her hand and held it for a long, quiet moment in the living room. She looked around at the space where photos of Liam and his late mother decorated the shelves, where toys lay scattered, and a half-finished blanket was folded over the armrest. It wasn't perfect or polished, it was real, and for the first time Mira saw herself not just as a visitor, but as someone who could belong somewhere. Weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, the rhythm between the three of them deepened. Mira balanced her studies with weekend visits to Adrian's home. She helped Liam with homework, shared bedtime routines, and discovered in herself a nurturing patience she didn't know she had. Adrian, meanwhile, began to let down the last of his walls, opening up about the guilt he had carried for years. The what-ifs, the regrets, the impossible standards he held himself to. "You're allowed to be happy again," Mira said one night, as they sat under a sky full of stars. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone." Adrian looked at her, his fingers brushing her cheek, and in the silence that followed, she knew without a doubt that she loved him. Not because he was powerful or generous, but because he was kind, because he showed up, because he let her be exactly who she was without asking her to shrink or change. And then one day, as winter crept back into the edges of autumn, something unexpected happened. Mira's past came knocking in the form of a letter from her estranged father, a man she hadn't heard from since she was a teenager. The letter was short, full of regret and apologies, and a request to meet. Mira froze, reading it, unsure of what to feel. Part of her wanted to burn it, forget the man who left her and her grandmother when things got hard, but another part of her, the one who had grown stronger, braver, more open over the last few months, wanted closure. Adrian found her on the balcony that night, holding the letter in trembling hands, and when she told him about it, he didn't tell her what to do. He just said, "I'll be here no matter what you choose." That weekend, Mira met her father at a park bench by the lake. He was older, thinner, worn by years of guilt and solitude. He cried when he saw her, and she let him cry, but she didn't forgive him. Not right away. She listened, told him about her life, about her grandmother and Adrian and Liam and school, and when he said he was proud of her, she nodded but held her heart guarded, still healing, still unsure. When she returned home, Adrian welcomed her with quiet arms and warm soup, and Liam wrapped around her leg like a tiny koala, and she realized then that family wasn't defined by blood or history, but by love and choice and presence. Months later, on a crisp spring morning, Adrian surprised her with a small key. The same one from the keychain she had returned, the one she had forgotten about. "Until that moment, it's time," he said, and handed it to her. "This house, this life isn't complete without you." Mira stared at the key, her eyes filling with tears, and she nodded yes, not because she felt obligated or swept up in romance, but because she knew in her bones that this was home. The day she moved in, Liam made a sign for her door that read Captain Mira, Star Explorer, and Adrian placed her college acceptance letter in a frame beside his family photos. They built a life together, not perfect but honest, filled with burnt toast and bedtime stories, early morning coffee, and late-night talks. Myra went on to become a counselor for children who had lost parents, using her story, her strength, her compassion to heal others. And every time she stood before a child or a grieving parent, she remembered the rainy day she found a forgotten keychain on a quiet street, and how that single moment of kindness unlocked a future she never could have imagined. Adrian continued to lead his company, but came home earlier, took weekends off, attended school plays, and learned to cook pancakes badly and joyfully. Mira never stopped writing letters to her younger self, and a journal she kept by the bedside, letters that said, "Keep going, you're closer than you think." And years later, when Liam graduated high school and they all stood together for photos in the golden sun, she handed him a new keychain, one that held a picture of the three of them, and he smiled the same smile his father had that day she met him, and said, "This is the most valuable thing I own." And Mira laughed, knowing it was true, because sometimes the smallest acts lead to the greatest changes. And the people you find on accident become the ones you were always meant to hold on to.